Hey folks, this has been Kenny, publisher of Business North Carolina Magazine. Recently we had a great roundtable discussion covering internet privacy and cybersecurity in the day and age of COVID. And we brought together some great speakers representing state government, private industry, consultants, and associations to discuss this really important topic that's changed quite a bit since we have so many folks that are working from home now, and it brings up a whole different set of challenges in terms of keeping company information safe and secure. So here is the conversation, or a snippet of the conversation. And we were lucky to have Brooks Rayford, CEO of the NC Tech Association, be our moderator for this. So take it away, Brooks and Company.
Thanks, Ben. So the topic today is one that we've had each year, but obviously in a slightly different context today with the impact of COVID. Not so much the economic impact that we'll be talking about today, more of the way of working, the way that security issues are handled in this kind of environment. Issues like employees who had historically not been remote workers, didn't even have a laptop that was provided by their employer. They might have had a desktop, and suddenly they're having to work remotely, either on their own device, which raises a whole bunch of questions, or be issued a device to take home. And so different companies and employers, depending on their size and what they do and the role of the employee, clearly are addressing that in different ways. So I'll start off with a broader question. You all saw some of these questions that were suggested, and I think the first one is a good one to start with, and that is, from your perspective and the role that you have in the organization that you're in, or in the case of Will, clients you're working with and others, what is the effect of the pandemic on remote work? You can touch on some of the things I mentioned, or anything else you'd like to bring up. Well, just raise your hand, and I'll at least be able to see who's about to speak. Al?
Sure, I can begin. I don't think I'm going to say anything very surprising, to be honest. We've all had a number of these conversations. We just had the North Carolina State Cyber Security Symposium. These very topics were brought up there as well. The difference is that the endpoint, the periphery of our security surface area has been moved out from our layered state security network. And so the end user and the end workstation, and also our vendors, by the way, are now our most exposed periphery. And not just that, we have more of them. So Brooks, as you mentioned, we've got a lot of users that were not remote users before. And as of March, became overnight remote users. And so we all had to adapt. We had to spin up a number of services, either brand new or expand. We discovered a lot of limitations that we didn't know because they hadn't been stressed to that degree. If you go from just a few hundred users to a few thousand overnight, as you can imagine, you're going to discover some changes that need to be made. And then, of course, our users are, I guess it really shouldn't be a surprise, but a lot of studies and both anecdotal evidence show that a lot of our users don't perceive the home work environment as they would the work environment. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you were to, say, survey an end user in the office and ask them questions about cybersecurity best practices, or to be frank, common sense, and ask them the same questions at home, you will get different answers. They become complacent. And I say they, I said we, all of us. I mean, we're working from home. It's a different environment. So we have new technical challenges. So there's things technically we can do, but we also have policy, training, and awareness challenges to inform and remind our users that even though they're working from home, it's no different. In fact, they need to be more careful, because if an organization, for example, doesn't use a VPN and everything's just cloud-based and they're on a pure internet connection, then all those protections they would have had on that entity's corporate network are no longer there. So now all they've got is whatever's on that endpoint and what the user chooses to do. And that can be a real problem. And we're starting to see that. We're seeing that with partners and peers, where they're falling victim to malware and ransomware at an alarming rate. And it's a real concern.
Right.
I mean, I think building on what Al said, I think all those things are compounded by the attackers escalating the way they're targeting the crisis and all those home users. They know that the defenses are weaker, and they know that people are more susceptible to the issues of the day, whether it's the latest status of the vaccines or other things about COVID numbers going up or down in your targeted area. And so they're coming after those users with much more targeted and interesting lures. And that also, so I think between the environment that you're defending getting more complicated, and in many cases having to create a lot of exceptions, and the attackers getting more focused on it, it compounds the problem. And I think the last thing we'll see is we've also seen a huge uptick in the adoption of cloud technologies, because to Al's point, like as you're trying to scale up those services, there's not enough resources in a business or in an organization to be able to do that, and so you have to look to the cloud to go do that. And many organizations haven't made that move thoughtfully, and so that increases the complexity of the attacks as well.
Well,
Brooks, I'll add. I think both Ryan and Al did great jobs summarizing some of the front end problems that the pandemic has created. I'll cover maybe two back end issues that I've seen in working with clients who have had incidents over the past 6 months. One is that the pandemic caused many companies to lay people off or furlough employees, and some of those folks are key IT professionals. And so when I come in, when an incident has happened and I come in on the back end to help a client try and respond to an incident, sometimes there's no one available to answer the questions, because the person who was this has happened once for me, the most senior IT person was laid off because they were being paid more than the person who was the most junior IT person, who had only been there for about 8 months at the company and had no clue why certain systems were set up the way they were set up, or why why this had been done and that had not been done. And some of that can be really key when responding, to authorities and regulators during a breach. So that's, one, I think, back end issue that the pandemic creates that you might not think about until it's too late. And then the other issue I've run into in an incident is the insurance, is how working from home impacts your cyber insurance, if you even have cyber insurance. I've dealt with a client who their insurer refused to honor the policy because the point of intrusion, as Al sort of mentioned, you have all these new endpoints, and they claimed that the insurance did not cover an intrusion that began on a home network. The policy covered the network of the company, and that did not include personal devices and home networks that were not initially contemplated to be part of that. And so those are, two back-end things that you really don't think about until it's too late, but there are things that the companies should be considering.
Clark?
Hey, I'm kind of like Will in some regards. I tend to only see clients when there's an issue, when things go poorly on some level. And so my observations so far have been, if there were flaws prior to the pandemic, those flaws have been exposed, whether it's on the client side, our client side. The rank and file employee who was very uncomfortable with technology before March did not magically get better at technology in April. And so we've seen a lot of issues with respect to, historical lack of investment in training and technology that have been exposed. And also just on there was a mention of moving to cloud services. On the other side of it, the side that our clients don't have control over, all the vendors that were experiencing a really heavy load early on, Microsoft, Zoom. We've had clients trying to get large amounts of data out of, say, Microsoft, for instance, and everybody using Teams and everything else back in March and April, we just couldn't get the data. So, the consideration of when you do move that data outside, how can I get to it quickly if there's an emergency, where in many instances there were emergencies.
There's something that we haven't touched on, which is the impact to budget. And we've seen this in a lot of hopefully that wasn't your question, but we've seen this in a lot of my peer states. My peers and I, we've had this discussion, even local government. That is a huge concern. So as we talk about all these security issues that we're dealing with, and the need to strengthen our security posture, even more so now, because we're in this remote telework environment, the fact is that we're being constrained even more so because our budgets are being scrutinized and cut because of the COVID needs. So that, there's that dynamics that's happening where there's a need for more security, but the security funding is not necessarily there to support it.
And that's